Okay, so it won't be a long walk here, but those points that you mentioned are good to keep in mind as we go through this. How data accumulates over time and how that can be visualized and accessed. Because those things are not terribly hard to add with this framework. It's pretty easy to add a lot of these things, but it's hard for me to know exactly what's useful and what just gets in the way um, for a demonstration purpose. Also, as you mentioned, it's not so hard to add new forms in between. If we decide that there's an ambulance form that should look different than these others, something like that. And so this is adhering to the DTEP standard, DETEP standard, as related in the OASIS latest guidelines. And so I just filled in a little bit of information here, and we can say that patient received bandage, they need suture, something like this. And we can mark a color. So black would be to see same normal triage. We'll say red. And so I'll just describe this form quickly. So each field kind of tells you before you fill it in what it's there for. It remembers data that was previously entered. This can also be saved off if we want to be able to reload it. But for the demo, I didn't figure that was necessary. These are standard on triage forms, whether the patient is breathing, whether they're getting circulation, and whether they have mental capacity. So I entered these, and if they don't fill those in, these will get mentioned as problems. And then these are the main critical care problems here. Contamination gets marked, and standard information about medications, allergies, and doctor information, and these sorts of things. So once all that's filled in, or if once part of it's filled in, we'll click Send Data. And I wish I could show this on a mobile device, because that's really what this is made for each of these boxes to fill the screen. So if you're here, and I can kind of pretend I could make it to the dimensions, but so you can slide down on your mobile to view different aspects of this and slide over. Okay, so then we send the data. Data was sent. So over here, we have a blank form at the hospital, and this could be on a timer, or it could, so it could poll, or it could, as it polls, it could list new messages down here in this box that I'm currently have as a comment box. So you could click it and it would show information. Or as Elisa mentioned, something interesting I hadn't really thought about when I was initially making this, is that each of these could be a drop-down. So as new data comes in, it identifies the patient the identification, and it just aggregates the data, which would be a nice way to do it. Of course, we're not really in the business of making hospital forms as I see it, but it might be good to do something like that. So when we refresh this page, the data from the triage form gets pulled in through the OASIS standards and changed and moved into these fields. So then we see that some of these things kind of get aggregated into fields that are meant to be easier to read for the hospital. So there's B negative blood type, 232 pounds, partially deaf down here, and contaminated got added to the triage status, so that's readily visible. And the chief complaints get listed together. and the estimated time of arrival is calculated. The type and the name here get put together, and blood pressure becomes easy. Just some. This is basically all I'm saying is that it's meant to be more readable to someone who's used to reading these things off of boards in a hospital. So that is the main crux of this. What's really important about this is that things are getting validated along the way, and that they're getting changed, and as it goes through another system, we can add information to it from other data types if we wanted to. So that's a quick walk through this. We also, I could show some of the administration for setting this up, but basically all I did.
Before we do that, I was thinking, I do want to go through that administration, but can you send everybody a link so that they can try to download it on their device?
Yeah,
I know
sure.
I've got one on mine, just so you can think about how you would do that.
And I tailored this to my.
This is not done in an app. It can just be used on a mobile,
yes,
right?
It can be used on any mobile device.
Yeah, this is a web app, so there's no.
There's not an app for it yet, right?
It's a web app, so it automatically will load. But I also have an interface if we wanted to make it a dedicated app. We could do that, but it would take a little changing. But basically, it's a web app, so it's just standard web forms and things like that. So there's nothing special, I mean, even if we just created an app button, it could load a web page. But if there's a reason we think we want this, well, it's dependent on the web to begin with, because by definition, it's transmitting data. So the person should be connected to an internet data.
It doesn't matter what the browser is, does it, or does?
No. It does not matter, because this is built on Pacquiao, which should support any browser. Actually, okay, let me go ahead and send these links out. I wish I had thought to do that before I started this. Okay.
Okay, go ahead and do that, Dan. And while you are, let me say a few words. Claudia, you asked a good question about, is this an app? And it's not. It's a web form, and you do have to have the internet up to enable it. And that's a question, and we need to sort of track these questions. Joe, if you could do this for me. So one of the questions would be, do we need to make an app of this? And that's something we need to consider, because, if you go to a disaster scene, chances are you won't have internet accessible. So you need to be able to use it in a standalone form. So what we're trying to do now is just get this basic capability, show it to you guys, and you tell us, what can you sell out there? What do people need? So I'd say, Joe, number one would be, does this need to be an app such that it can run in the absence of internet coverage? So let's continue that list as we go through this discussion. Go ahead, Joe. Joel.
So my question is, can it, even if you don't have internet, let's say I downloaded it ahead of time, and then all of a sudden I do sync up automatically when I hit the internet. Does it allow you to autonomically update even when you hit the internet?
It doesn't yet, right, Dan? You can't run it standalone without the internet, because as a web form, you're needing a constant connection. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, okay, so if the page has already loaded, and let's say you lost internet connection, or let's say the page hasn't loaded, because the way this framework works is that it will wait until you're connected to the internet, and then it will show you the page as soon as you're connected. But if you've already have the page up because you've been connected to the internet, and then the internet goes down, and then you click send data, then I believe what you'll get is yeah, because everything's server side, you should get a dead page, I believe.
Yeah, if you try to send it, if you've already loaded the form, could you load that form on your mobile device and wait till you reconnect to the internet? What you stored, what you put in?
No, it's basically connecting through the SOAP. So it's trying to, but yes, we could do that. I've got it connected to a local database as well if we wanted. If we wanted to do it that way, to store the data and wait until you're connected, then automatically send it.
Yeah, I mean that may be something that would be easy to do than, because people
I think
are
what we
doing
have
this.
Yeah, Joel, I think you capture another good point. So that's the second point, Joe, in your list of things. And Dan, we're going to be getting great ideas for things to pursue with this, but Sheila is not comfortable pursuing any of them until we know exactly where we are, where's the customer, and what do they want. So we've got to, this is a point where we're saying, here's where we are right now, and we've named one, and Joe, the number 2 one will be the thing Joel just mentioned, is that with or without the app, we would need the ability to support the functionality with the internet being unstable.
Yes, it will be both synchronous and asynchronous. That you do have the ability to download ahead of time, start populating the form, get as much data as you can while you have the internet, and then you get there and it's a disaster zone and there's no internet. You should have the ability to asynchronously do things. I've worked on something when you're out in the middle of nowhere on a ship. Sometimes you have internet and you don't. And the question is, yes, can you continue to work on the forms? Yes. And then when you hit the internet again, it automatically uploads.
Possibly one way to do that, and I haven't thought it through, just as you mentioned your use case, I'm just trying to think of kind of the most elegant way maybe, would be to set up a local host server on the device itself and treat that as though it's the remote server, and then when the remote server is available to switch over, I'd have to think about it a little bit more.
Right, well, that's what we don't want to get into yet are the design considerations. So we want to capture the things that we know could and need to be done and not try to design them or discuss how we want to do them yet, because we can noodle this for the rest of the day, but we just want to capture these. So, Joe, you keep this list going, and when we are through, send it out to everybody, and we'll all make sure that's what we've agreed on this call are the things that need to be thought about next steps, okay?
Hey, I have a question. Okay. Is anybody familiar enough with the hospital industry to know whether most hospitals have an intranet in the hospital, like a local network that even if there's no outside internet connection would still be able to operate inside the hospital?
Yeah, they absolutely do.
They do.
Okay.
Absolutely. And while I'm talking, I'd like to make a general comment based on what Lisa's saying. And Joel, this is mostly targeted to you, probably me. As I work through this with Dan, I want you guys to think of this in 2 ways, and this is where Lisa's trying to guide us. This is what we want to come out of this call with is a phase 1 that says, Joel, you or me can sit down with the customer and show them something very basic that says, hey, this is really working in the background. This data is going into one form. It's going through a server. It's going through a transformation into another format and showed up on this mocked up hospital form. So the first thing we want to think of is what's the most basic, easy thing we can just show a customer. They'll still have a lot of questions. They'll still want to see other things. And then this list that we're talking about is something we would prioritize and put into a version 2 to make it a more, a better demonstration. So Dan and I had already talked about a number of things that we could do to improve those, and I'll add those to the list as we go.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Well, one question comes to mind is if I have a picture or anything, can I add anything to this form, like a picture of the patient or something? I don't know, but visual, not a streaming thing, but just a picture.
Yeah,
Well,
not on this version.
Yeah, I didn't think of that actually. I think that's a brilliant idea because it takes us out of the space of XML thinking to the very quick information grab on the other end so the patient isn't confused with another patient or something like that.
Right.
There's no.
So let's put that down as number 3, patient picture of the patient, and it could also be a picture of the disaster scene, but it's something else that, remember this triage card, TEP information is wrapped in a distribution element, so you can think of it as an envelope. So in addition to the data, you can certainly have other information. So systematically, yes, a picture would be valuable, and that would be a third thing, or other things that we want to put in the envelope along with the patient data.
What would the download, I mean, what kind of time are you talking about to have to load that? Can you do that in just a streaming, or what? How would you do that?
I think it'd be in a picture. If you're on your cell
picture,
phone, taking this data.
Yeah, on your cell, every cell phone has click the picture and it goes with the form.
Yeah, if you're asking how much data is that to transmit, it would be quite a bit more data, but it should still be very, usable. Let's say it's a 300 pixel by 300 pixel by, 3 bytes or something. That's still very manageable. That can even be converted into a web-safe string and added to the patient identification field in the XML form. Under an appropriate sub-element. I think that would be one way to do it.
Okay, so we're not thinking about the how to do it, but let's add a third thing then, Joe, on your list, that a picture of the patient or disaster scene could also be included, or should also be included, or an option.
Because you're on your mobile device, yeah.
Could I add another general comment?
Sure.
As we continue to go through this, I think it helps to think in terms of, we won't talk about a specific scenario, but in terms of real life scenarios. So think of this in 2 ways. One is the most simplest scenario, day to day, which we have to push, because if this isn't useful day to day, then nobody's going to use it for a disaster. So day to day, this is kind of what we're showing here is, you have a patient or a handful of patients with their triage cards, the data going directly to a hospital they are en route to. Then if you start thinking about disasters, as something scales up, more and more organizations, more and more systems become involved, that's where the power of this really starts to shine. So one of the issues isn't just data getting from the field to a hospital, which is extremely valuable, obviously, but there could be, in our real world demonstrations out in the field, there were 4 actual systems that never communicated together. So there might be a local system, a state system. You got to transport somebody to another state that has their own system, and if you have too many patients where the feds have to get involved, then you got JPATs or somebody, and they spend terrible amounts of resources and time doing what we're trying to automate here. So think about also when these guys, all these different systems have their own platforms, they're proprietary. A lot of them come with their own handheld hardware. And what they'll do is a lot of this data can be defaulted in terms of, who am I, who is my organization, what's my location, things like that. And then a lot of this information, rather than being transferred to a hospital, will be transferred to, say, I'm a local EMS responding to a disaster, and I'm in the field. So I've got people laying around. I've got a patient here on the ground in front of me. I'm quickly capturing this information and doing my job moving on. And this data gets sent to a triage site in a hangar, which is another organization and another system. And this data is going to them so that they have all the latest, so they take ownership, quote unquote, of this patient. And then it goes on and on to the ambulance and to the hospital. And today, of course, they do these with cell phone apps as well. So just think of that in terms of what we've got in front of us is the most simple, basic scenario. But the patient tracking system to other patient tracking systems is a huge problem that this solves as well.
Okay, so next step, shall we talk some more through that process? I like, Tim, that you laying out those scenarios. And the smaller one, you can really think of a multi-car accident, as simple as that might seem, where we've got, you know, a half dozen people that need help. So, and then, of course, a large scale. So as we go through this, do you think the next step would be each of you loading this on a device for you to put some input, or do you want to talk through some more use case information?
I like the idea of what we've already talked about, making this sort of an app that, you know, we can put on our cell phones, or you can load on the customer's cell phone. So that's a really good idea. Oh, here's the other thing I was thinking of. I think at the moment, this app doesn't do this, and we probably don't want to do it for phase one, for version 1. But say if Dan fills out this information, hits send, it shows up on the hospital side, and then something changes. At the moment, for demonstration purposes, we can't make 2 or 3 changes and then have the hospital form update. It's just a one-time thing at the moment. Is that right, Dan?
Well, in a way we can. You notice that after I send the data and then I go back, the data is still here until I clear the page and reload it. So if you were to, but you know, in the field, that might not be the way someone would want to do it, because maybe they accidentally refresh the page or something and lose it. It is pretty simple to save these fields if we wanted to into a sort of intermediate database. It's already linked up. It just takes adding that as a persistent. But I'm not sure exactly. I mean, we'd probably want to go over the specific design for how we would want to update information.
Right. But Joel, one of the things that when I used to do this stuff with Livecast, and they lay out 8 different cell phone, different manufacturers, and they would put the video and how it could play across all different, you know, like bring your own device. Well, one of the powerful things about the cloud and transforming is showing people that it doesn't matter what mobile device they have, they can get this form on their mobile device. Is a good demo, and it is a good point to make in and of itself, is that, you know, it works across mobile OSs.
Yeah, I agree with that, Joel. And then back to what you were talking about, Dan. In the real world, it wouldn't work that way. In the real world, see, what this triage tag isn't a triage tag. It's part of the system. And as soon as they fill this out, it's going to their database. And if something changes, like the blood pressure, they would simply go to their handheld app or cell phone app, whatever it is, and change the blood pressure. And that information, bang, would go to whatever other systems were appropriate in that particular disaster. So yeah, it's setting aside how you would do that. In the real world, each of these are patient tracking systems. They're storing the data, and each change to that data, and every time something changes, it's going to other patient tracking systems and or a hospital once you identified where a patient's going.
Yeah, not to get into the how, but would wonder how you bring up the patient if there's a list of recent patient records, or whether you start typing the patient name and it fills in the rest of what it knows, or I'd just like to hear more specifics of that use case when you, as we think about it.
Yeah. And this is just from a marketing standpoint, because I used to be in the process world, process mapping with the Coop Foundation, but we did the 2B vision. So we would lay out, this is the way the as-is system today works visually from a process perspective. And then here's how this innovation changes that whole process, because you've all said how long it takes to transform data between one form and the other, and people can't get data out of one system into the other system. And if you could show that, just the visual process of saying that when you get this takes out all these steps aren't needed anymore, because you automatically populate these, you transform it to these other forms. You don't have to keep re-entering data.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think that's a great idea, Joel.
And we could, when you're talking to, you can show the, yeah.
I'm sorry, you finish.
Well, if you show the cycle time, obviously, some people in the industry know how long it takes to go from a scenario, and it has this cycle time because you have to keep re-entering the data, or the data never gets there, and then you show a streamlined version and how much time it saves, and one of the things is so to save time or whatever, but you show people a positive visual of the impact of going to this kind of transformed form that works across systems, across apps.
Yeah, I really support that too, and let's consider and discuss that just a minute, because it's not just the saving time, but we're talking about the accuracy and the security of it as well. And those are the marketing terms that we need to focus on. And coming up with a process description for this, and maybe a nice graphic, would be another real good tool for you sales folks to have in your hand. So not only do you have a nice little simple first revision device illustration, you can also say, that can be the eye catcher, but then you show this graphic that says, here's the process of what has to happen, and here's the way this product can save you time, be secure, and allow this transformation to happen.
Yes, that would be very helpful, because then everybody knows a process visual, just one process visual shows a lot of how you change and improve the performance and of optimization of what has to be done by law, and what everybody gets frustrated with because they can't get they can't get the data out of one system to another.
Yeah, and we've basically got that information. We just need to assemble and package it into a good, marketable, simple thing to consume.
Yeah. Just make it a disaster, a patient scenario. You may have one or two or three max, just to show how in this scenario, this is traditional how it would happen, and with our capability, it streamlines this, and it already populates these things, so you don't have to do this. Takes out all these steps.
Well, in the meantime, they're trying to save the people's lives too.
Right. That's what I'm saying. The first hour is the golden hour. So if that can be, there you go.
And that's
so
the
Joe,
main thing.
I'm sorry, Tim, I want you to hold that thought just a second. I want Joe to capture this as our next item, is a process chart for patient tracking, so that we'll all remember when we see that what we're thinking about. Okay, yes. Go ahead, Tim.
Yes.
I just wanted to underscore what Claudia said, is these guys aren't out there to manage data. They're out there to save lives. And so that's going to be a huge thing for us, is to say, look, you can, it's time, speed, accuracy, it's retasking resources that usually do, they have extra resources that do this manually, track it. You can retask resources to more important things. These are all the benefits that we would, add into this visual, this scenario, and et cetera.
I can see that response tag, and then the deceased, immediate, delayed, and minor would give them the priority. And that might be all they could even do at that point, so that we place it in a priority. If it was like 20 or 30 or 40, I don't know. I think we have to have an app.
Yeah, thinking about what was just mentioned, we might want to look at input methods, you know, if there's some kind of voice control or if there's some way to prioritize what information gets on the form to make it easy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I learned from the best, Don Miller, state of Washington, and it had to be quick. It had to be like one word or two. I mean, you know, so that they would understand what you meant when it was passed through. I don't know, Lisa, if that's what you're thinking on with the distribution element, but
well, the picture is 1,000 words there.
And TEP is designed with obviously mandatory and optional elements, and it was the practitioner's consensus of here's the absolute minimum information we need to care for this patient and move them to where they need to go. And it comes down to the most basic information they need is a unique ID, and that's it. If that's all they've got or all they've got time for, they move and they go.
right. That tag.
Yep.
Is probably everything. And then the priority.
Now, do we want to generate an ID? I mean, that's kind of what I'm doing now. Or do we want them to enter an ID?
No, I think well, I don't know, Lisa. It should generate one, shouldn't it? I mean, and then it was just the priority.
This Joel, we did a thing at Baltimore Stadium where it was a mass disaster. I guess a bomb at the Oriole Stadium, and I thought they put something around everybody's wrist so that if you could, I mean, the way that it would automatically populate their ID somehow. I don't know. It was because obviously autonomically populating a form with whatever you have, if some way you can do that, but again, you know, reduce the time of having to enter data.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that band and a triage tag are in some ways the same thing. It's just different organizations or the systems do it differently, and all of these devices have scanner capability.
Right.
So in terms of an ID, they automatically generate it and they scan it and bang, it's in their, you know, database for that patient.
Okay. So wow.
Okay, so knowing that we're just at phase one, this is just to get our appetites wet, and we've gotten a few good points so far. We all have a link now that we could go to with our mobile devices. Shall we bring those up ourselves and see which of the devices those of us are using and what it looks like on the device, and see if that brings some more ideas to mind?
So we can do that while we're on the phone, just change screens and download, I guess.
Yeah,
should be able to. Yep. I say that as I'm doing it myself. I did it before, but I haven't done it with this link, so we'll all do it together.
We got a new.
Yeah, so your form will appear blank because your browser doesn't know this information, and I didn't set it to persist in the database.
So I was
Can you email
talking
that to
you.
us?
Yeah, I've emailed it. I can also paste it if it's easier in GoToMeeting. Sorry.
Well, it's probably best if it's email. Well, it is to me because it goes to my phone that way. So it will need to be on our phones or mobile device that you're wanting to try it on.
Oh, okay.
I was just going to mention that what I'm going to personally do is take the triage link up on my cell phone and put the hospital link on my PC, just to show them going between two devices.
Yeah, that would be good. And likely the blocks on the triage form are not going to fill your screen because I kind of designed it around the smallest screen cell phone. So I'm not really sure exactly what it will look like on yours. But I can make that stretch. I was just a little afraid to because of the fact that a first responder would be using it. I didn't want it to be variable.
Hey, Dan.
Yes.
So when I brought up the hospital side, it's already populated.
Oh, yes, the hospital side will because the way it's set up is we're all sending to the same mug, receiving on the same mug, user group. So anyone who sends is going to show up in the other person's hospital load the first time. So in other words, if you send from the triage form, someone else then loads the hospital page, they're going to get your message. And then when you load the hospital page, you're not going to see the message because they already received it. So yeah, I'm sorry. I could set a mug setting on the triage form if we want to have different mugs.
Right. So if I understand right, then right now they're not independent. We would step all over each other doing this.
Yes, because
we would. In fact, yeah, and Dan, maybe that's the point we should switch over to what you tried to go to a minute ago, was just on the user setup part of this, because probably most folks on the call don't know what a mug is, and that's a user group. So let's touch on that next while everybody's getting the app loaded either on their device or on their as a hospital form on their computer, and let's let Dan explain to us what a mug is and how we set up the pub sub, because I think that's very important for everyone to gather.
Okay, so this is our basic administration form. I'll quickly go through the different basic concepts here. You'll be familiar with users. It's just who's sending and receiving and who can get into the system with what level of permissions. A mug is just a user group. So when we add a mug or manage a mug, I called this one triage. So right now, if we had more users set up, and they can have different permission levels, we can add the users to either the publish or the subscribe groups.
So why don't you do that right now as you walk through it? You just make each one of us an individual user.
Okay. It's going to take me a minute here.
It's good for everyone to see this. I know you're going to have to think for a minute as you're doing it. So what he's doing is something that is required for all publishers. So each of us with our triage form on our app will be a publisher. And so anytime we do this pub sub thing, this is what has to be set up. Now, what's important to know is you set it up once. So if I'm a publisher for data always, under certain circumstances, then that's retained in the system. And then you identify on the subscriber side who uniquely gets to have access to the data. So just, I want everybody to be comfortable with this, because this is the whole notion of our information sharing environment, okay, whether it's health, energy, public safety.
Right.
Of course, once you set it up once, it happens, then you can exchange data a bazillion times under those same rules. If you change the rules for a subscriber, then, that subscriber's rules will be different, maybe only under certain circumstances. Between 8 and 5, this particular subscriber gets access to this data. So those are the rules, perhaps, that get played into who has access to data when. This is the kind of thing that Dan set up for the Rocket City Hackathon, so that when we had anybody that wanted to, be able to do a publish subscribe through the system, we had a set of usernames and passwords that could be used by different groups. As we expand our capabilities, once we get off the ground, hopefully we'll be able to use this architecture, and you guys will be able to demonstrate more things. Just got to get past square one.
Okay. And so now I'm going to manage mug users for the same. Well, I can manage the group we're in, or I could create some new groups. But for now, since the software behind the scenes, I've just hard set this mug number, basically. So what I would need to do is add a mug option, or have some way of identifying a mug with someone's IP address or something like that. So the same person is able to both publish and subscribe within a group. Typically, though, someone's going to be publishing and another group of people is going to be subscribing. But just so you know, in case that's confusing, it might be a little confusing at first, that a user group can publish to itself. Okay, so what I will do is, how about I keep my user publishing and I set everyone else to receive the message. Yeah, and okay, it's going to take a little editing from my side because I'm also have the user. Well, I have the. I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, the hospital subscription is set to my user. So what I'll need to do is create a different version for each of you, I guess, or have that as an option on the form. It will take some editing. Okay. Yeah, Lisa, I'm sorry, I can't do that real time. I'll need to either add an option, or I'll need to create a different web page for each person.
Yeah. See, Lisa,
okay,
Lisa,
well,
this is. Yeah.
Go ahead, Joel.
This is where I get into my discussions of dynamically handing off that I get in briefings with the DoD and Intel, and because you've got a mass disaster, it's changing rapidly, and you've got one team of people who's in leadership, and they need to hand off because it's gone from a fire to a chemical, biological, radiological, and the ability to hand off that leadership, data exchange, even control of systems, is something that we're working on with another group, that, as I said, collaborative space, because of that ability to, I don't need to go to a different application to share. So right now, if you were in the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, and Intel community, and you wanted to share data, you'd have to go to the Joint Intelligence Enterprise, leave your screen to go to this other application called JIE. Well, people don't want to do that. They got to leave.
Right.
They got to keep on this.
In fact, that is exactly the purpose that this serves. Although it's being masked by doing a lot of hand holding here, because we're choosing for us each to be individual publishers. This can be role-based, and it can be role-based in that a certain person that has these credentials has the authority to do X, and so there's not all that handoff. So we have that ability. It's just not showing itself with the way we've chosen to demonstrate it.
Yeah, that's something.
So Dan, go ahead and do that part offline, and I think we'll need to follow up maybe even tomorrow afternoon if y'all are available, and let's block another hour of time so that he can get the credentialing set up, and we can make that next step, because I think this is valuable for you to understand. And Joel, you bring up a very important point, and actually you pointed to one of the things the system is very capable of, and that's having role-based publish and role-based subscribe, because that is very important.
Maybe then ask Dan to go ahead and set it up as the role.
Right,
and
not would be sales, or maybe we have it sales 1, sales 2, sales 3, or responder 1. I mean, Tim, how would you want to show it if you were going to go to Kevin McGinnis and show him this? What would you want the roles to be set as? Or does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, for the demo, I would show us as responder 1, 2, 3. I think is a good idea. And then on the other end, same thing, hospital 1, 2, 3.
That's simple enough.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, Dan, so if you can set that up, then when we have our next call, what we'll do is we'll have responders, and we can each take an assignment, and we'll have hospitals, and we can both use if you have a pad, you may want to do that if you're going to be on the phone, and then also have your laptop on a hospital form, and we can sort of walk through a little bit how you would show that to a customer.
Okay, and I could set the role as a parameter in the web address, or it could be a drop-down select box, depending on what's better, or it could be separate web addresses. Those are just some ways to do it, but I'll go through the terminology quickly here. Okay, so after MUG, we have wormhole. This is basically just the schema that we're talking about that's getting validated and in the correct namespace. And then transforms. So data can be transformed on the way in or on the way out. And then we have cup, which sounds like mug, but it's a totally different thing. It's basically just a user profile. So the main, the key to what it is just the transform that gets associated with a user. So
right, if you can think of those as the mug being the message user group and the cup being the custom user group, it helps identify that. And when we look at the role-based, Dan, we don't want to make up anything new. We want to be using the roles that are identified in the DE XML, so that we're mapping directly to the role-based capabilities that the distribution element has. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And we're going to need another slide or page or something that, we have some graphics that show mugs and cups and stuff, but we're going to need to refer to something that has these definitions.
Yeah. So the main idea behind the cup is that you select your transform and whether it's on the publish or the subscribe when it gets applied. So that's a simple enough idea. And then and these other options aren't so important. This is for WordPress updates, so notices get published that way, and this is for iPause admin for the iPause service. So that kind of gives you the idea when we use these words, wormhole, transform, mug, and cup, what we're talking about. It's kind of, it may sound like very bizarre terminology, but it's basically just group, schema, schema transform, and user profile. It's really what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, I think that pretty much wraps up the walkthrough.
Okay. No, yes. Good stuff.
Okay. Go ahead, Claudia. You have comments?
Yeah, I do. It's back to the cloud. And so right now they're running on servers where, right, at Honeycomb, I mean, just for demonstration. But we're set up to go in the cloud. And is JSP going to be scalable in the cloud? Because we were always told it wasn't. So I'm just asking that question. You can kill me later, or kill me now, but I need to know that answer before I go out there. Is JSP going to scale? Like if we're on Amazon or whatever?
It will absolutely scale. Yes, it will.
Okay.
Scaling is not an issue with this. And Dan, I think you are running right now on the Amazon cloud, right?
Yeah, this is on Amazon. If I gave you the name-based address, you'd see Amazon AWS in the address, but this is just the quick IP.
Yeah, let me ask a question to you, because can you push alerts off this? Like, let's say this is like a transform form, but something in the patient, you have a picture, you have the form, and you want to push an alert. Can you alert out of this at all?
Well, alerts would be a CAP message. So if you had some processing that said patient this and patient that, we have temp messages, triage cards coming from a particular location, maybe you want to generate an alert. The processing in the back end could produce a CAP message, but it would be a CAP message that would be the alert. And it would be, and perhaps you'd have subscribers like iPause, maybe, or another redistributor of messages that say, if I get this service telling me that I have, major triage event in this location, then I want to send a CAP message to a particular, it wouldn't be a public alert, it would be a private alert, perhaps to the local EMS or some other directed feed for a CAP message. But I would see that CAP would be on the subscriber side to that, where the processing behind the receipt of the different triage forms would be the decision-making entity.
Right.
Can
so
you go ahead, Joel.
In the example I'm thinking about, because I used to talk about pandemics, is that as these forms, these triages, you're getting a lot of people coming in there, and you're saying, well, maybe do I have a pandemic? I don't want to say I have a pandemic until I know I have a pandemic. But I do, if the numbers start getting a lot higher, would there be an automated alert to go look closer or send more people? What I'm saying is that obviously if it's something that shouldn't be that bad, it's something else, but there's something growing. If a lot of people dying all of a sudden, and your triage numbers start going up, do you have that's when a country would get very worried about the public release of this data. If you have to be very private and, maybe pull in other people that, like a CDC or something like that, say,
yes, and that's when you would activate a private messaging to those decision makers that can pull the trigger for a public alert at a different point. Yeah. These are all pieces of the puzzle.
Yes.
And on the end point, there's a geographically released CAP message that goes to the public, but if there's other decision making that goes on, there's other CAP messages that go to very specific subscribers that are waiting to hear that kind of information. Maybe it's EMS in a geographic location first, and for these people that are responding, they need to take level A gear or whatever other protective equipment they need to that location because of that specific need. But you keep it within confines, and there's a lot of processing that goes on about that.
Or you may have a terrorist thing. If 2 or 3 things happen within co-location, and all of a sudden the numbers start coming in, somebody else that's maybe a counterterrorism guy, you may have thought this was like we all knew it was terrorism after we had 2 planes come into. So it's that kind of thing that I think then some of the people get alerted that normally wouldn't be alerted, but if the numbers start showing up like that, they should be, they would be.
Right, and remember that we're the post office that's moving that messaging around, and then whatever decision making goes on in another application that's right now not ours. One application we're considering that, if we can find a funder for it, would be that we would actually build that core capability of tracking the hospital status and providing distribution for the ambulance to those locations based on their triage information. So that is the background piece that would be the decision making for this particular need. So there's other decision making and other softwares that are perhaps already in use where we would provide the messaging for that in a standard way.
Right. Okay.
Okay, good thoughts. And I think this is good. Anything else that we want to cover at this level? All right, I would think it would be really nice. I don't know if, Joel, you have something already. You could maybe share with us on a process chart that has the same kind of information we might want to gather here. And maybe you could put that out. And Tim, I know you have a good, strong sense of what the process might look like for this, so that we could sort of be, in the meantime, over the next day while we wait for the next one of these demos, we can be thinking about that.
Okay, I'll look. I may have some. I don't know if I still have. That was a while back with Coop Foundation, but that's what we did. We worked all off process charts, and then we did demos of new technologies for healthcare that would then rewrite our processes based on what we thought that innovation would impact the hospital. But then we went and run all that stuff in the hospital, and usually we had to update our process flow diagrams because what we thought we would have, the impacts were not always what we thought. The human dimension does change things.
Right, and it really can be at a pretty high level because whatever it is, we're going to adapt it to this particular need. Right. And Tim, you may have some ideas too of how to start real simple and begin to map out the things that we would want to share with someone on this.
Right. Okay. We'll do.
Okay. So
and I want to be clear on that.
Go ahead, Tim.
I'm sorry. So I want to make sure I'm clear based on what Joel just said. We're talking about a very simple process flow that would help us walk a customer through the to be and the as is, so that we can relate the value of this.
Right. I don't know enough about the hospital, whatever scenario we do, but we'd show an as is hospital scenario, emergency admission, discharge for, let's say, some kind of thing that happens in the field back to the hospital, and they say this is the as is and here's the to be. So there'll only be two charts. One is the as is, one would be a to be.
All right. So if you see a format that you've seen or used in the past that you think is really good visually, that would be helpful.
All right. If I don't have it, I'll call some people. I'll try to find it. I know some people have it. I know it exists. Okay.
Well, otherwise we'll just do a basic flow chart, process flow.
Well, actually, Elisa and I met the guy who was the father of this. Remember, Elisa? We met Dennis Wisnowski. He's got more of this than anybody, and he had a thing called ProcessWorks, and that's the tool we used when I was with the Coop Foundation. And I don't know what he does now, but he was at this event that Elisa and I were at a week ago.
Well, yeah, if you can put your hands on something like that, great. Otherwise, we can, like Tim said, just build a basic flow chart, which would work too. If you have something handy, that would be ideal. But let's try to get something we can just kind of sketch out and maybe even talk to it on our next call.
Okay,
Dan, but back on one of the forms you had, the number one process or whatever, it said WordPress.
Yes.
So it's not an interactive form that was built by us. We have to go out and use WordPress.
No, it's that's just a kind of add-on. It's not
right. That was just put in there, Claudia. The reason that was put in there, and it was only for CAP as a subscriber, So we could take CAP messages coming from an iPause live feed subscriber, and we can use WordPress to post them to our website. And it's in there for that purpose. And that's really what it will be used for one of these days. That's where when we get a site set up on our website for live iPause feeds, it'll be using WordPress to get it there. But it's not intended for anything to do with CAP right now.
All right, good. Because I don't want it out. I mean, I don't want to be demonstrating it. So, I mean, I'd rather, well.
See, it's in the background. I mean, it's not even something any of our customers would see. It's just one of the things we can do is we can pull iPause alerts as a redistributor, and we can post iPause alerts on our website. And our website would be the subscriber, but WordPress would just be the interface to get it there. It's not, you know, it's not something we'd sell or promote or anything else. It's just a tool we're using.
Okay.
Yeah, all WordPress has to be is, I mean, we don't have to use it at all, but if we do, it's basically just a way to format our messages so that they're nice and they're searchable and stuff like that.
Yeah, I know
basically,
what it is.
turns it into a web page, yeah. I mean, that's all we would use it for.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? All right, do we want to try this for this time tomorrow or shoot for early next week?
I'm fine tomorrow.
I'm too.
Okay. Tim, can you make it tomorrow as well?
Yeah, I'll make it.
Okay, so Joe, can you set us up for the same time, same station tomorrow? And we'll go at it an hour. Hopefully we won't go this long tomorrow, but we'll play with it on our devices, and Dan will have some users set up for us to put some data in, and we can bring your own device and see what we can do and bring your questions, and we'll also talk about the process flow, both as is and to be.
We'll get it set up.
All right, sounds good, and we'll grow that list Joe has, and then we'll see where we go next.
Okay.
All right, thanks,
See you
everybody.
all. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.